Aloha, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your co host, Dean, alongside my host, Chris. And he's been gracious enough once again to let me start the show. And we're going to talk about something I think it's honestly like it's probably one of the most interesting topics we've ever talked about because it doesn't only talk about the human aspect, it talks about cannibalism. Some of you might know about this story. I mean, there's a lot of movies out there that cover it. There's a lot of people who've already talked about it over the years, but it's kind of like one of those stories where it was very popular back in the day and then kind of dropped off for a while. So that's why we're going to talk about it today, because we're going to revisit it in a way. Like societally, we're just going to talk about it and see what we can kind of bring about in terms of conversation and explore the conversation itself and just see what we can figure out in terms of like what's interesting or what's new, whatever. So today we're going to talk about the Uruguayan Flight 571, in which the rugby team of 45 people had crash landed and most of them passed away, but some of them survived and they engaged in cannibalism.
Yeah, dude, thanks for introducing the show. I figured I'd give you a chance to kick this one off because it's been a while for you, Mister. I disappear for almost a month. How dare you? How dare you have a vacation?
How dare I have the craziest, longest vacation that is reasonable for any person, which is 3 weeks in Japan.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm excited to talk about this one today. The crash of the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, also known as the Andes flight disaster, or also known as the Miracle of the Andes. They took off from Montevideo, Uruguay to Santiago, Chile, and they ended up crashing in the mountains of Argentina on October 13th, 1972. We had 45 people on board, including 40 passengers and 5 crew members. We had the pilot in command, who was a seasoned pilot of Julio Cesar Ferradas, who had about 5,100 hours of flight time. And he was accompanied by his co-pilot Hector Lagurara. So the aircraft took off and a storm front over the Andes forced them to spend the night in Mendoza, Argentina. Long story short, they take off. And this was a flight path that the pilot, Ferradas, had flown across the Andes 29 times. One thing to take into consideration here is that his co-pilot, he was training him and he gave him control over the aircraft as they flew above the Andes. Given the weather, there was cloud cover and they couldn't really see the mountains below. With regards to the cloud cover, they ended up flying at an altitude of 18,000 feet, and they were at a point where they couldn't visually confirm their location. They couldn't tell what the terrain below looked like, pure cloud cover. Then you had the aircraft encountering turbulence, and due to a lack of radar coverage, they were still flying over the Andes. The main pilot failed to notice the navigation error. So if you look at the flight path of like where they departed, where they were like supposed to go and ended up crashing, it was a little ways off.
A couple things that jump out to me about this story, or this experience rather. So 45 people were involved in the transportation of this plane, and apparently I think it was like 12-ish people died instantly on impact, according to our research. That's pretty intense, right? There's 33 people who were left over. And I think in our minds, as we're talking about this situation, like it's natural to think like, oh, 33 healthy people. No. And if not severely hurt like that, they're definitely suffering, because it says in the research we covered that the amount of drop that they experienced smashing into the side of the mountain, immediate frigid cold, they're probably poorly prepared for the elements in terms of clothing. They certainly don't have enough food for a very long time. We have to paint the picture like that, right? So like 12 people die immediately, 33 people are left over. We're talking about days and days after that. I think that's critical to talk about. You know, the fact that this wasn't like a one and done, like, because when you're hearing the story, you're thinking like, oh, oh my God, 33 people survived immediately. That's great. Like, they're healthy. They're good. No, they probably have broken bones. It's like minus 30 degrees outside. Not a fun environment for anybody in any even if you like crash landed and you're like okay, like physically, like like as soon as you like if it was me, as soon as I hit the ground, I had no broken bones. I wasn't starving yet. If I was outside in the element of like minus 30 degrees, I'd be like, oh fuck, we're done. Like that's just that the mentality of that situation is nuts.
Right. And you know what's crazy about the whole situation is when they realized, well, the pilot kind of realized, like, oh shit, we're going to go straight for a ridge. They applied maximum power to like pull it back up. So not only did they have the shitty weather, they had turbulence, which caused
Yeah.
them to lose altitude. Then when
And
they
and
realized,
and 1972 technology.
yeah, that
Let's
too.
not forget that. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, true. Well, I mean, you got to work with what you have at the time. I'm sure it was state of the art at the time when it comes
Right.
to navigation. So it's not
You're not flying in a mud
like an
box,
Airbus,
like
right?
yeah, I get it. Right. Come on,
Yeah.
Boeing.
Some of the passengers and the pilots like, well, we're getting really close to the mountains. They try to pull up, and that's when the airplane, the lower part of the tail cone they suggest may have clipped the ridge. And then the next collision ends up severing the right wing. Then you have the instance where I believe, like, if you watch a documentary, the fuselage and the back of the plane end up splitting apart. All the survivors, the people that survived, and obviously the people that passed away, were in the fuselage. So we have them clipping the mountain, and then we have the immediate aftermath of the crash. Of the 45 people on board, we had 12 of them die instantly. Several more would die within the hours and days that followed, including the team captain and doctors. It's a rugby team flying to Santiago, Chile to what? Probably play a rugby match. They're not prepared to be in snowy weather. They don't have snowshoes. They don't have all of this thermogear to make sure that they have to survive in that type of weather.
I have to interject because this is fucking crazy. This whole story. The reason why I find this nuts is that the typical commercial liner, based off of our research, is it's like 30,000 to 40,000 feet, right? Like that's the normal cruising altitude for a jet line. Maybe it's different. 1972 Chilean, Andes location or whatever, like maybe it's different back then. I can't imagine it being that much different 60 years ago. That's a long time, right? But honestly, I think that's not too crazy of a difference between now and then. So what I find fascinating about the story so far is that the Andes Mountains are about 23,000 feet above sea level. So even if you took the lower end of the cruising altitude for a commercial airliner, which is 30 to 40,000 feet, you still have a differentiation of like 7,000. I did the math. 23% difference in terms of the lowest amount of altitude. So you're talking about when they clip the mountain, they were 23.3% lower than the lowest level of the cruising altitude that's acceptable for a commercial airline. That's not enough for me as a person to say like, oh, there's a conspiracy. That's not enough, but like it's still something where it's like that's an outlier. That's a strange circumstantial piece of information that's worth discussing. I don't know how to like interpret that. Like I wish we had like a legit pilot who was like old, maybe even older, who was like in his like 50s or whatever. Like he could talk about that, like, oh, this is why it happened. I would totally accept that. But because we don't have that, we have to bring it up, right? So 23% chance of a lower altitude hit than what was expected based off of the regular cruising altitude. That's really strange, right? Like why, like even if the pilot was just drunk, like just gone or on drugs or like whatever you want to imagine, there was something going on beyond the norm based off of that math. Does that make sense? Like does that stand out to you as weird?
Yeah, I guess so. But then again, you have to take into consideration that when you're flying over some certain terrain, you can't, like, if it's cloud cover, it's really hard to tell.
Sure. Didn't you say that like the pilot he had only done like this like 29
So
trips
the
or
the
something?
season pilot the main pilot did this 20
Yeah.
trip 29 times, but it was the
Okay.
co-pilot that took over the controls over the Andes.
Okay. But still, I mean, 29 times over the Andes, like that's not like super seasoned in my mind. I guess there's some room for, error, confusion.
The main pilot had over 5,000 flying hours, so I think that's good.
Sure, sure, sure. But not over the Andes, which is, that's pretty significant. The Andes
Right.
are very treacherous, apparently. It just seems like in my mind, like as much as I want to think that this is a conspiratorial outcome, like there's something strange going on, I still think that like more likely than not, it's just like, oh, the guy who was flying the plane, he was not super seasoned, like especially over the Andes, especially over like snow capped mountains. Like it's just how it played out, unfortunately.
I think it was a culmination of bad weather, lack of flight experience from the co-pilot, the pilot not, I guess, I don't want to say paying attention, but it seemed like he recognized the
Yeah.
situation too late.
Like the same mentality of like when you fly out of like Dulles Fort Worth to go to like Tampa, you know what I mean? Like it's like, oh, we're good, like
Yeah.
like it's 30 degrees outside, cruising altitude. We're gonna be there in 5 minutes, and then you crash and you're like, oh fuck. Like it's like you don't know.
Before we started recording, I did mention to you that I did watch a documentary on this. And then I did back in the day, I did watch the movie Alive that was based off of this situation, if you've ever seen it.
Dude. Wait, real quick. I had this queued up. I know it's ridiculous, but this is so old. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Marge is like afraid. I think it's called Fear of Flying. Like the episode is called Fear of Flying. She's afraid to get on the plane, but she's basically like hovering over the TV and she's crouching down like it looks like she's sitting on the couch, but she's not. And I remember like very vividly, she's listening to the TV and she's watching a movie. And the joke is she's watching the movie Alive from 93. But in the movie, this is not in the actual movie, but like what she's watching in the show in The Simpsons, it's like the guy's like, no thanks to the plane. Most of us are still alive. It's just like she's so terrified of flying. That's the Simpsons writer's joke about, like there's this movie and it's playing off the parody of the guys who crashed in 72. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Like I just thought that was worth mentioning because it's so stupid funny.
So let's jump right into the aftermath of the crash and the people initially passing away, right? I think the biggest key players in the entire situation, for the sake of the story, you have Fernando, who also goes as Nando Parado, and Roberto Canessa. So Nando was a rugby player. He's the one that loses his mother, and his sister dies of internal wounds from the crash. You had Roberto Canessa, who is a medical student and a rugby player. These two are key figures to me because they're the ones that end up making the trek, the life-saving trek to get help. So let's set the scene. The airplane crashes, folks are dead, the survivors are in the fuselage. The tail of the plane is God knows how many miles away. So the normal thing, the natural thing that they do is that they start to gather as much food and supplies that they could find. You're not talking about like regular food, right? You're talking about fucking airplane snacks. They take all of that stuff, they start rationing out the snacks, the food, the drinks. When it comes to setting up shelter, the fuselage, even though like the plane kind of like broke in half, the fuselage was still kind of intact. What they were able to do was to grab luggage and seats that fell apart, and they were able to create this makeshift wall to protect them from the cold. And on top of that, they went through all of the luggage and everything to see what they could salvage to keep themselves warm to the best of their ability. And on top of that, while they're doing that, they realize that, hey, there's a radio in the plane, but there's no battery. The battery was in the back of the plane, which broke off. So eventually they decide that, we have to get this battery to get the radio run. So they find the back of the plane. They're able to find the battery. And what they were able to do, which I think is really important, they were able to strip out the insulation and other salvageable parts from the back of the plane that they were able to like stuff into their clothing to keep themselves warm. What's really interesting is that how resourceful human beings can become when you are put in a life or death situation. Because when I was watching the documentary, dude, it's freaking insane what they were able to do. They were able to create snowshoes out of salvageable clothing and pieces of the plane. They were able to create sunglasses. I forgot what material they used, but it was like some sort of like reflective ice. Yes,
I
some
know.
sort of reflective material that was on the plane
They
to
were able to craft like tube socks out of the flesh of like human skin. Like it's like I know it's so funny. It's like ridiculous and funny, but like okay, this is the one thing I'm going to say before you continue is like if you have people who are dead around you, you're crafting things out of the plane that crashed that are providing with cover, like, you know, whatever. That's so admirable. Like it's like they didn't go immediately to let's cannibalize the dead. They went to let's cannibalize the plane first. That's really that's admirable, I think, honestly.
yeah, I think what's admirable throughout this entire situation is that you're talking about a group of people that a majority of them are athletes. They're rugby players. Some of them are medical students, some of them are team doctors. But if you think about it, how thinking of on your feet you have to be, it's like, okay, we could use the insulation. We could use the copper wire to
Yeah,
like stitch
not dumb.
blankets and sleeping bags. We could create snowshoes. We can create fucking sunglasses in order to survive, right? So if anything, it shows the genius and resourcefulness of humanity in general. Once you are put in
Right?
that type of situation where you have to survive, you don't really know what you're capable of. One thing I'll say before we continue the story is focusing on that in general. We don't know what we are capable of until we are put in a life or death situation. Okay, this will lead up to the
Yep.
decision of eating their friends and family that have passed away.
And to be very crystal clear for all of our listeners, if Chris was in the situation, he would fucking eat me immediately. He was just completely like, okay, fuck, did you kick me, asshole?
No, I didn't, I swear. We're going to leave that in.
Good. Because
We lost you.
I-
He started
get-
going on this tirade of how I would eat him without
he's gonna
any
eat me.
remorse or thinking.
That's why he cut me out of this goddamn show. So okay, so let me continue here. Chris, I know you. Immediately, you're gonna be like, Dean, you broke your leg. You have a lot of meat on you because you're fat as fuck, and I'm gonna eat you. That's what's gonna happen. That's
Dude,
what, and meanwhile, I'm like,
dead,
Chris,
though.
why would you do this to me, Chris? I love you. And you're
I
like,
wouldn't
okay,
kill you.
shh. You'd find a pillow and you smother me. You know, like it's just shh, shh, shh. I love
Like they
you.
do
Shh.
in movies.
Yeah. I love you. I forgive you. Shh. And then you eat my leg.
Right? No, but on a serious note, and the only reason we try to take a lighthearted stance with this is that it's really difficult to talk about, you know? Like I watched the documentary, it's about an hour long. You could find it on YouTube, and they actually interview these people that survived. There's footage of them of what they look like when they
Yeah.
got rescued by I think like the Chilean Air Force.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, wasn't the majority, like, weren't the majority of the people who were in the crash who survived, they were like younger soccer players, like right out of high
Rugby.
school, like rugby players right out of high school, like right out of, like they are about to go to college, like super young. Like, isn't that the age group? What's the age group?
So they were in their 20s.
20s. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so
Yeah.
some of them were probably
Still
in
young.
college. Yeah. What's interesting is I saw this in the documentary where they actually interviewed Nando Parado, and he's the one that lost his mother and his sister died in his arms. In the documentary, he said that when his sister passed away, he heard this internal voice that said, now's not the time to morally compromise yourself. Now's not the time to grieve. Now is the time for you to survive. You have to get out of there. And what does that sound like, dude? It sounds like the third man syndrome.
I don't know the pain of the situation because that's like unbearable. The idea that you have your sibling or any close family member like passing away in front of you, like that's unbelievably unbearable. Like I can't even imagine that. However, asterisks. I would like to think that if I was the sibling or the loved one or whatever who's passing away in front of you, be like, I'm fucking out, man. Like, eat my fucking body. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you have to. I love you. I love you. You have to survive. My body is imaginable. It's not something that's physically lasting in this world. It's maybe like 100 years. My bones are gonna last. Like, who cares? If I'm
Right.
gonna die, I love you. Eat my body. That's it. And I like think that that's the mindset. Like that the people died who were dying like had like maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
One thing I would say, I think you sum it up perfectly to what some of the medical students that survived the crash said, that told everybody, listen up, we're out of food. We need protein to survive. And the only way we can do that is if we eat the passengers that have died.
Yep.
I'm sure at first people were reluctant. I'm sure some people were like, no, I can't do that. I can't eat my friends. I can't do this. I don't. There's a moral aspect to this. Then you have to take into consideration the thoughts of people's religious beliefs when it comes to this situation.
If somebody's dead in the situation, the medical students are like, hey, listen, like I know you had an admiration and a closeness or affiliation or whatever to this person who was alive, but we're gonna die. Like if we don't, because there's no other
Right.
food, there's no
Right.
rabbits, there's no goats, there's
There's
nothing
no
nearby,
birds,
there's
nothing.
no birds, nothing. Yeah, exactly. So we gotta fucking use this protein. Let's take a pause here. You, as a practicing Catholic,
Oh boy.
would you ever? Okay, yep. You see where I'm going with this?
Yep.
Like, there's this in like okay, so in Christianity and any religion really, like if any, there's a following of a religion, there is an understanding that there's a sanctity of life. There's a sanctity of the body, all that jazz. What's your take on this idea that, like, okay, well, if God was there, if there was a being, there was a creator, they would want us to survive if we were in this situation, like whatever. Like, would you go for that? Or would you be like, no, I have to die because I have to follow the rules, like, etc. Like one or the other. Like there has to be one or the other in my mind.
I would like to think that, you know what, I would do what I need to do to survive. Straight up honest. Probably won't like it. I'll probably
Yeah.
have to hold down bile while I do
Yep.
it.
Mm-hmm.
But what these people probably did was, it's not food, it's just fuel. It's fuel. It's fuel. It's fuel. To keep me alive, I have to stay alive.
Right. Yep.
Because in the documentary, they heavily like interview like the two main guys that made the journey. They point out that you're not thinking about what's far ahead, you're thinking about now. You're thinking about your next step. You're thinking about the next thing that you're going to do. There was no time to entertain a moral discussion. It's, you either do it or you don't, and you die. Those are your options. Eat and live,
Yeah.
don't and die. And you'll probably be eaten if you die, to be honest with you.
Once again, like think about it. Like if you're sitting with your friend who you've spent dozens, if not more hours with, who you're like, okay, yeah, hey Fred, like, Fred, like, how's your wife? How are your two kids, man? They're like, what were they now, like 2 and 4? Like, oh, that's great, man. Yeah. So if you're talking to Fred and you're comfortable on a plane, you're warm, like you think you're going to get to your destination, you're going to play soccer, like Fred is great, like whatever. Maybe you're on the team, maybe you're just like working with Fred on the team, whatever. If you crash land in that mountain and you're a good person and you care about Fred's family, and Fred has no ailments whatsoever because he survived miraculously, whatever explanation you want to have, like he has no broken bones, like he's standing up, and you talking to Fred is like, oh, I lost my fucking leg, I'm bleeding out in the snow, I can look down and I can see this fucking hurts, I could see a quarter quart of blood pouring out into the snow around me. if you still had some semblance of wherewithal and you are a good moral person who cares about your friend and his family, and you also understand that life is fleeting, you're not gonna live forever. Fred's not gonna live forever. His family, his kids' grandkids are not gonna live forever. Of course, I would be like, hey, listen, man, if I had the wherewithal, I'd be like, look at my face. I'm gonna die. We're a million miles away from any kind of help. I'm bleeding out like, a quarter quart of blood per half hour. I'm gonna die in like 3 hours. You start a fire, you eat my body. Listen, you got to get home to your kids. You have to get home to your kids. They need you. Because like if you have kids and you're a father and they die, you die, and the kids have no father, like that's really bad for growth and development. You got to get home. In my mind, I know that's not how things played out, but I like to think that it's closer to that as opposed to just a free for all of like, oh God, we're gonna die. We need to eat food. We need to eat people who are dead. Like there's got to be some kind of human element. It's not like you just go from human to cannibal, if that makes sense. Like that's why I bring it
Right.
up.
The survivors that actually penned, books and wrote about the entire situation,
Yeah.
they all wrote that, it was not an easy decision.
Yeah.
I think it was
No,
Parado, he wrote that in his memoir. He basically said, at high altitude, the body's caloric needs are astronomical. We were seriously starving with no hope of finding food, but our hunger soon grew so vicarious that we searched anyway. Again and again, we scoured the fuselage in search of crumbs and morsels. We tried to eat strips of leather torn from the pieces of luggage, though we knew that the chemicals they'd been treated with would do us more harm than any good. We ripped open seat cushions, hoping to find straw, but only found inedible upholstery foam. Again and again, I came to the same conclusion. Unless we wanted to eat the clothes we were eating, there was nothing here to eat but aluminum, plastic, ice, and rock. Here you go. Do we eat the dead or do we eat fucking inanimate objects? And what's
yeah. So they
interesting,
tried.
yeah, they tried. They literally tried to eat inanimate objects. They tried to eat pieces of leather. They tried to eat pieces of the seats. And they also mentioned this in the documentary that Parado protected the bodies of his mother and sister so they would not be eaten. And they also discussed the process in which they kind of did this. So if you're kind of squeamish, you might want to fast forward a little bit. So they ended up drying the meat from the bodies in the sun to make it easier to eat. At first, they were so disgusted that they could only eat the skin, muscle, and fat. But in the end, they ended up eating hearts, lungs, and even brains. And the religious aspect that you brought up here is that all of the passengers were Roman Catholic. So they all believed that eating human
Interesting.
flesh would lead to eternal damnation. But some of the people rationalized it by comparing it to the Eucharist. And if you're not familiar with what the Eucharist is, it's in which the priest does the conversion of bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ. So think of the Last Supper, where Christ says, eat this bread, it is of my flesh, drink of this wine, for it is my blood, type of situation. From the religious aspect of it, that's how they rationalized. And another thing that fueled the decision, probably should have mentioned this earlier, but they ended up finding the back of the plane. They found the battery. They managed to wire I believe it was the radio, the AM radio. What they heard was the rescue effort had stopped. So they realized very quickly that they were on their own and they had to survive. And to make matters even worse, on October 29th, 16 days after the crash, an avalanche ends up striking the fuselage while the survivors were asleep, completely filling it with snow and ice and smothering 8 people to death. The avalanche ended up burying the fuselage within 3 feet of the ceiling. The survivors trapped inside realized they would run out of air And that's when Parado took a metal pole from the luggage racks and ended up prying the cockpit windscreen open to dig a hole to get some fresh air. There was a blizzard that raged for 3 days. And in that situation, they were stuck inside there with the dead bodies for 3 days inside of the snow filled fuselage.
Jeez.
On day 3, that's when they started to eat the flesh of their newly deceased friends. Parado is quoted as saying that it was soft and greasy, streaked with blood and wet cartilage. I gagged hard when I placed it in my mouth. Eventually, we get to the situation where they finally realize that, hey, no one's coming. And that's when Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa make the decision that they're going to make the trek out of the mountains to go and get help. So, in order to prepare for the trek, they ended up creating makeshift sleeping bags and they gathered supplies. They used different parts of like clothes and stuff to make these makeshift backpacks and to protect themselves from the elements.
I'm sure this was covered in some depth of detail that we weren't able to discover in our research, but it would be so fascinating to know when that avalanche happened, right? They were trapped in the plane with the bodies
Yep.
and they knew for a fact that like, okay, we need some kind of caloric intake. We're going to die, whatever. And you were taught, you made the reference of like, okay, so they're, he was putting the flesh in his mouth and just like gagging. Understandable. What I would like to know on a personal level, if I could ever find out, did they start some fire on the plane? Did they have some kind of butane cooking device? Or did they just straight up sever human flesh, put it in their mouth uncooked? And if so, how did they know where to cut? What did they cut with? Like
Well, a
these are
couple of
very
them were medical
visual.
students, so
So
they would
okay, so
probably know.
so they knew where to cut. I would still like to know what they cut with because like, did they sterilize it first? Like, cuz I in my mind if you eat raw meat of any animal regardless of if it's human or pork whatever, if you eat a raw animal, you're increasing the chances drastically of getting sick. So if you're desperate, I get it. It's like, okay, I don't have fucking time to cook. I don't have any kind of fire. There's no place to start a fire, whatever. I just need to get this meat in my mouth, in my stomach, because I need calories. There was probably a debate about that. Like these are finer aspects that my analytic brain is like naturally drawn to. I wish so hard we could find out about it because like it's not just kind of like a morbid curiosity. It's just basically like I just want to know what these people went through because it was something that I could never imagine. I could never imagine going through this and they went through it and I want to know about it.
Maybe it's some details that they wouldn't wanna share, and I don't think we would wanna really know. It's one of those
Right?
type of situations, like, do you really wanna know if they just ate it raw? 'Cause I think that they did.
In our research, we found that there's a movie that's posted to Netflix called Society of the Snow. I had never heard about it. Came out like 1.5 years ago, 2023, called The Society of Snow, rated really pretty well, honestly, in my opinion, for a thriller. 7.8 IMDb, 90% Rotten Tomatoes. I am so gonna go watch this because apparently Society of Snow is exactly about what we're talking about, which is the crash in 1972. And I think that it's just something that we're gonna have to watch and come back and revisit.
And I didn't know that was a movie until you mentioned it to me. Like I said in the beginning, I watched Alive, the 1993 film, but I didn't know that they made another film recently about this, so I'll have to check it out. And also, I watched some documentaries about it with the actual survivors being interviewed. And to wrap up today's show, I want to go into the 10-day expedition that they ended up taking through the mountains. So, the history documentary that I watched, Nando basically said that internally in his mind, after the avalanche and, they're eating people, he said to himself, like, they have to get out of there. And he said that you could keep saying that to yourself, but unless you put a date to it, you're just going to keep putting it off, right? So he gave himself the date of December 12th to make the journey out of the mountains to go and get help. We fast forward to the morning of December 12th, 1972, and this is day 61 since the plane had crashed. And Nando Parado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin donned multiple layers of clothing and set off westward up the steep mountain behind the crash site. Each carried about a 3-day supply of human meat for food. They had no mountaineering equipment. They had no map, no compass, no experience in climbing, but yet they were determined to overcome the Andes or die trying. The climb was more challenging than they anticipated. What looked like a 1-day ascent up the slope turned into a 3-day ordeal of kicking steps in knee-deep snow on a 45-degree incline. The air was so thin and oxygen was so poor at these altitudes, causing the climbers to tire quickly. On the first night, they found a small ledge to camp. Despite squeezing together inside their sleeping bag, a howling blizzard made it extremely harsh at night. Canessa described that the first night on the mountain as the worst night of my life. The other survivors watched from below, spent those days anxiously observing the tiny dots slowly inching up the slope, praying for their friend's success. So we fast forward to December 14th. After 3 days of climbing, Parado and Vizintin finally reached the top of the ridge. Canessa, who was exhausted, ended up staying in the camp that morning. They stood at approximately 14,715 feet on the peak, later identified as a ridge near Mount Saler. They expected to see the green valleys of Chile beyond, but instead they were greeted by the heart-dropping vista of endless snow-capped mountains in every direction. That's when they were hit with the realization that they were deeper in the Andes, and the co-pilot's dying assertion that they were near Curico, Chile, had been wrong. In truth, they were about 55 miles away from any inhabited area. So that night, Parado and Vizintin ended up rejoining Canessa at the camp. The two acknowledged that they might be walking to their deaths. And that's when Parado said, apparently, we may be walking to our deaths, but I'd rather walk to meet my death than wait for it to come to me. And that's when Canessa was said to have replied, all right, Nando, let's go die together. So they realized that their journey would end up taking longer than 3 days. So they made the decision that Vizintin would return to the crash site, taking advantage of the downhill route so that Parado and Canessa can end up sharing the ration that Vizintin had brought with him. So now we're back to Parado and Canessa pushing forward, descending the far side of the mountain range. For several days, they hiked westward down an ever lowering series of ridges and valleys. As they went, snow gradually gave way to rocks and then patches of grass. They had reached the snow line and were finally leaving the lifeless high alpine zone. They followed a river, the upper Rio San Jose downstream, which led to the Rio Portillo and eventually towards Chile. Each day brought encouraging signs of human presence, and around the 7th day of walking, they found an empty soup can. And on the 9th day, they saw cows grazing, clear evidence of people nearby. So by this point, Canessa was weak. You're talking about over 70 days. He ended up losing nearly half his body weight and could barely continue. When I was watching the documentary, Nando basically said that he didn't think about anything other than the next step in front of him when they were on this journey, because he said that if he focused on anything else, he would collapse and die. His drive to survive is just the next step. I have to take the next step. I have to take the next step. So again, the drive of humanity to survive, right? We can't really fathom unless you're in that type of situation. On the morning of December 20th, as they were gathering wood for fire, Parado suddenly spotted 3 men on horseback across a river, the Rio Azufre, on the Chilean side. So they frantically shouted at the men, trying to get their attention. But one of the horsemen, a Chilean muleteer, Sergio Catalan, noticed the 2 ragged figures across the river. Unable to hear them clearly, Catalan shouted, "Mañana," which means tomorrow, and gestured that he would come back as it was late in the day. Catalan and the other horsemen disappeared, leaving Parado and Canessa elated but anxious. True to his word, Catalan came back the next day, but the river, which sucks, was too swollen to cross, so he devised a clever way to communicate with them, scribbled a note, tied it around a rock, and tossed it across the river. That's when they wrote back to him that said, I came from a plane that fell in the mountains. I'm Uruguayan. We've been walking for 10 days. I have a friend who up here who is injured, and there are 14 other people in the plane that are injured. So upon reading this, Catalan signaled that he understood. He immediately set off to get help. Before he left, he tossed them some food, real food. Catalan ended up informing the local authorities at a police outpost in the town of Puente Negro, who in turn notified the Chilean army command in San Fernando. Parado and Canessa were rescued by the Chilean army, and on December 22nd to the 23rd, the Chilean Air Force sends out helicopters, ending their 72-day ordeal in the
72
Andes.
fucking days.
Yep, 72
Unbelievable.
fucking days.
I have a comical comment and then I have a serious comment. I'm going to do the comical one first because I know that the comical one is not how things played out, and the severity of the situation is much more severe than I could possibly imagine, my dumbass. But the comical, I have to bring up the comical one because I imagine like he's standing on the other side of the river and he sees these two people who are emaciated. Like try to signal him, we fucking need help, dude. Like you can you imagine you're dying, 10 days wandering in the fucking frigid, somehow you're surviving. And then this guy's like, I'll be back tomorrow. and the guy is like, when he's like, I'll be back tomorrow, he's like, I got Netflix to watch. I got this show. I made this bean rice mix. I'm cold. I need to go home and eat this. Like, I'm so tired. Just give me a day. Of course, he has no idea what's really going on. That's the joke side. But then the serious side is like from the perspective of the people who are looking for help. Like they're across the river. They're seeing this guy. Like it's like, I'll come back tomorrow, whatever. And then finally, like they're probably thinking like, this dude's not coming back. Like we're screwed. Like we came this close. We're dead. Whatever. Like this is our fate. But then he comes back the next day and they start communicating via rock throwing, which is unreal. They get some food and et cetera, et cetera. There's some hope. But can you imagine the sheer elation that you would feel? You're starving 10 days. You probably did weird shit that you would never have even thought about doing as a normal person in regular society. And you also think about like people you lost, the people who are still surviving, they probably died. Like some of them probably died while I've been gone. All of that psychological horror that's been playing out since you left. And now you have some hope. Like I imagine that the flipping of the negative to the positive in terms of no hope versus hope would be so strong that it would test your psychological construct. Does that make sense? Like if you had nothing and then you suddenly had everything, that alone would test your psychological makeup of surviving and all that stuff. Like I don't know. That's where my mind goes.
And even that just being, I think coming out of that situation, you'd be a little bit more grateful for what you have.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. No doubt.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Of course. You would have to have amnesia to lose that. Like if you came out of that and like, hey, we're going to give you $5 million. That's the only situation I can imagine where you go from nothing to everything, where you're like, oh, okay, I don't give a shit. But like, that's not how life works. You're always going to have that level of like, oh God, I almost died. I ate people. Like people almost died that I loved. It's just, there's no getting away from that.
Yeah, I completely agree. This situation, this event, whatever you want to call it, kind of speaks for itself. It's a tale of people with unwavering teamwork, love, and determination to survive. And that's the only reason why they made it out alive. And also the two people that decided to make that trek talk about risking it all with the attitude of, I'd rather die trying than dying huddled in a fucking fuselage waiting to freeze to death.
Yep.
My final thoughts on this, is that I said it a couple times before and I'll say it again. This story just highlights the resilience of humanity's ability to survive. Just that. You
Yeah.
don't know what you're capable of unless you are put in a situation in which you quickly realize that I either do this or I die. There is no time to whine and complain.
Or other people die, right? It's just
Exactly.
like if I have to lose every orifice of my body, every like assembly, whatever, like arms, legs, just I have to fucking do it. There's no questions. That's just if we're all gonna die someday soon, which is very, very soon in the context of existence, do something heroic.
Right.
Honestly. Like, why
Yeah.
would you not fucking do that? Like we're all gonna die, but just
Like,
do
what is
fucking
there to
something to
lose?
save someone else. Yeah, exactly. We're all going to be dead in 100 years. No one's going to remember this story. No one's going to remember me doing this. No one's going to remember that person who I saved. But in this moment, I know that my chances of saving that person are drastically increasing the outcome. And that's all that matters. As hard as it has to admit, like we have to admit that situation, like that's how it plays out in this
Right.
situation.
And one thing I want to add for a little bit of comic relief, you remember when we used to work out together in college and you were for the listeners, Dean was at one point in the Marine Corps, and what he would do when we would work out, he would mimic what the drill sergeants would say to him when we would do push-ups. He like got in my fucking face. I'll never forget. I'm doing push-ups. He gets in my face and he's like, anytime you drop your knees, someone like a Marine dies. And I was like, okay, fuck. like I'm like I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude. Like, is that what they did to you?
The joke is that like when you went home that night, like that was forever in your mind, but I completely fucking forgot I said that. And it's just like, of course that's not fucking
It's
true. Like, yeah,
it's
like I went home and ate cheeseburger. Like no one's gonna
right.
fucking die.
right? Noah's gonna fucking die. But that you saying that like stuck with me all these
Yeah.
years, kind of
Yeah.
like as a motivator, you know?
And I can't imagine what these people went through in the
Yeah.
Andes Mountains eating other people
Yeah.
because I've never eaten anybody and I would never
Goodness.
fucking want to do that. Um, what a great story in terms of, I mean, not great, but like in terms of like conversation and
yeah.
philosophical, psychological, like all that stuff. Like this was a decent story to have at our foothold to explore. And I hope that our listeners, if you guys like listening to us, you think that there's something we missed, or there's something you want to add to what we said, or you want to just say you're fucking stupid for saying that, please let us know because we will gladly revisit this. This was a very intense but very good story to cover.
Yeah. And we do this within like we have what a maximum of an hour and an hour and a half. And I don't think,
Yeah.
to be honest, unless we did like a 3-hour show for this one, you really could do it justice.
Yeah.
But the last thing I'll say is that you feel for the people that passed away, but also you have to commend the people that did what they needed to do to survive. Like, how the
Sure.
fuck without any training or anything like that, climbers have died doing less than this. And you have
Yeah,
people.
they're out there doing it. I wouldn't say for fun, but for challenge. And dude, here's the fucking thing about humanity. We like to get on roller coasters. We like to go out and wander. If you're someone who is taking a critical position against somebody for what they do for fun or admiration or exploration or thrill, whatever, within reason, right? We're not talking about like Jeffrey Dahmer, like killing people for fun, but what we're saying is like if you're going out there, you're riding a roller coaster, you're climbing a mountain, whatever, you're doing it for fun. This is different than the situation we're discussing in the sense that you're suddenly finding yourself in a situation where from the outside it might be thrilling in terms of perspective, like like, oh my god, I would totally try survival. I would not eat people, I would eat people, whatever. But when you're actually in it and you're not choosing to be in it from the beginning, which that's basically people being in this plane crash, they didn't want to be in the plane crash. This is a different beast. To tie it back home to this rambling bullshit I'm saying is if you have a situation where you're suddenly finding yourself where you're like just like I'm gonna fucking die, people are dying around me, this is not what I wanted, this is not real, but I'm gonna survive. That's wholly different than going out and seeking like some kind of pleasure or fun or whatever. And the reason why that's important is the human aspect in terms of the state of nature, like whatever you're going through, like you have to understand that in yourself and other people if you want to understand the nature of reality as we exist as people. You have to accept the fact that there are some situations in which people eat people, and it's not about good versus evil. It's not about right versus wrong. It's about, I'm alive now. I need to stay alive because whatever. Like, I need to feed my family. I need to go do this thing. Like, we could all understand that, like especially if it's like I need to survive for my family. You know, I have daughters, I have kids, whatever, sons, whatever. I have to fucking stay alive no matter what. Chris, like I'll throw you the final word, but to go back to what you were saying, like with Catholicism and stuff like that, like when they were coming to that realization, they're like, okay, I have a belief structure that's important to me. I believe it. It's my very soul. But after all of that gets shed and all of that, and like you're in the face of impending doom and your family's in impending doom, like what are you going to do? Like of course most of us are not going to face that before we die, but like these people did, and this is an important life lesson. And so it's so critical to talk about, and that's why we covered it today.
You'll never know until you're in that situation. You can read about it, you can talk about it like we are today, but at the end of the day, unless you and I are in that situation, we will never know how we'll react. I'd like to think that, maybe we would do what we need to do, but you just never know. All right, listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want us to cover more topics like this, I think another one I'd be interested in covering, which was a similar type of situation. I believe it was the Donner Party, and that was in the 1800s. So I think that'd be an interesting topic to cover. But again, folks, hope you enjoyed today's episodes. If you have any questions, comments, or if we missed anything, or if you want us to go in depth on a particular topic or situation within a topic, reach out to us. You have our email address of twroadpodcast@gmail.com. Reach out to us. You know, we love interfacing with the community and we love talking to y'all. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.